Today on Politics Stuff, we're going to discuss how Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to reframe the gun control debate as a healthcare crisis and epidemic. We're also going to discuss how they're trying to play up the levels of violence here in America and trying to scare you in order to take away your constitutional rights for your right to defend yourself. I'm Jonathan Ramos, and this is Politics and Stuff. So, as I said, today we're going to be looking at how Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to reframe the gun control debate in their favor, specifically framing it as a healthcare crisis. Now, to be clear, politicians try to do this all the time to reframe these issues in their favor, but it is important to notice when they're doing it and why they're doing it. So, the Democrats, though, they're trying to reframe the gun control issue because of their past failures and inability to achieve gun control policy. Now, what is framing, though? Framing is essentially how information is presented to you. It affects the way that we perceive and think about something. There's a famous psychology study wherein there were two groups of people. These participants both groups were asked, or rather shown, a picture of a car that had been in an accident. Now, they were asked, in the first group, was there any picture of glass in the car that was hit? In the second group, they were asked, was there any glass in the picture of the car that was smashed into? And what they found was that the group that had been asked if the car had been smashed into had actually misremembered there being glass in the picture when there actually was none, and that was because of the way that the question was framed, using the word smashed, because the word smashed has this association with more destruction, which affected the way that people perceived by a rather significant margin. Now, what you're saying, though, is that the Democrats are trying to reframe this as a healthcare issue, starting back in 2016. And the reason they're doing, and I think this was well written by Aidan Quigley of CS Monitor, as I was doing the research for this. He has a quote here, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, but I'll have the link in the description. He interviewed the dean of Boston University of Public Health, Sandro Galdia, and essentially says that by framing it this way as a healthcare issue, it shapes the way that we approach gun control for the sake of public health while taking the values that surround this issue out of the equation. So essentially what he's saying here is that by framing it as a public health issue, it takes away the emotions or the core values and principles that we as Americans hold when in regards to our constitutional rights that have been secured in a Bill of Rights. That if the Democrats can paint gun control as a public health crisis, then they can say hey, look, we're the ones protecting the public's health. The other guys, they don't want to protect the public's health because we're the party of healthcare. And I would argue that that is why Democrats are doing this, is because of the fact that the Democrat Party has associated themselves so strongly with healthcare and healthcare crisis that's going on in our country, that if they can reframe the gun control issue, they can basically sweep it in under what they perceive and what I would argue many Americans perceive as one of their big topic issues, which would be the healthcare crisis and the healthcare system in our country. And if they can disassociate the core values and principles, those principles that are fundamental to our Constitution, then they can be able to push these unconstitutional policies of restricting or outlawing just assault weapons. Now, and we'll get into this a little bit later. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to have on screen for you, is the Biden and Harris campaign website on the gun safety. And again, this will be a link in the description for you. Now, what I'm going to do is, let's just go ahead and read this. So, the Biden plan to end our gun violence epidemic. Remember, epidemic. Again, this is all about public health crisis. It's a crisis for the public health. It's healthcare, Democrats. So, first sentence here. Joe Biden knows that gun violence is a public health epidemic. Almost 40,000 people die as a result of firearm injuries every year in the United States, and many more are wounded. Now, before going on, the number that he's pulling this from is from a CDC report that was published in 2019 that was examining all the reported deaths of 2017. Now, it's important to note that when he says every year in the United States is 40,000 people, that's straight up false. Only in the last couple years have we seen an uptick, and that's still lower than our and some of our highest peaks, which I'll have on screen from the Pew Research. So let's continue reading his campaign website. Some of these deaths and injuries are the result of mass shootings that make national headlines. Others are the result of daily acts of gun violence or suicides that may not make national headlines but are just as devastating to the families and communities left behind. So let's start breaking this down here. So we go from Joe Biden knows that gun violence is a public health epidemic. It's 40,000 people a year. And then this is a sneaky thing that they're trying to do. So they go 40,000 deaths, and the next thing they say is mass shootings. Then they go on to say daily acts of gun violence, followed by suicides. So let's break down these numbers. So first off, what you'll see is that according to the FBI, there were 221 people who were killed in mass shootings for both 2016 and 2017. Now, the FBI defines a mass shooting as 3 or more people, regardless of the situation. So this could be at a home, this could be at a hotel, this could be at a school, it doesn't matter. If 3 or more people are shot, that is considered a mass shooting according to the FBI. Now, of those, half of those deaths could be accounted for the 2017 Las Vegas shooting, as well as the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting. Both horrible events, and honestly, some of the, what epitomizes, the evil that humanity can commit. But what we have to do is take the emotions out of this, because although those are horrifying and unjustifiable acts of violence, these are statistical anomalies. These are not that common. But what Democrats and Joe Biden is trying to do is they're trying to play up that level of violence. Because again, let's reiterate this. They go 40,000 deaths a year, mass shootings, daily acts of gun violence, suicide. Let's also acknowledge the fact that they say some of these are mass shootings, others are the result of daily acts of gun violence. The reason I bring this up is the vaguity in their words, because they know that what they're trying to do is flip the equation, because what it actually is that according to the CDC, and I'll have all this on screen as well as, again, sources in the description, there were 38,882 reported gun deaths in 2017. 23,854 of those were suicides using a firearm. That's horrible. Suicide is honestly one of the worst things that anybody could do, especially to themselves. But this accounts for the majority of those firearm deaths that Joe Biden Democrats are talking about. But again, notice that suicide was the very last thing that they mentioned, and I'll show you here on screen again, it's the second to last paragraph, and it's the only one that, if I remember correctly, that they actually devote to addressing suicide on this page. Again, second to last. They keep trying to minimize the how much of the firearm deaths are accounted for by suicide while hyping up the level of violence due to mass shootings and homicides, which are both, again, unacceptable that these things would happen. But let's look at the homicide deaths. So, of the homicides using a firearm in 2017, again, the same report that Joe Biden and his team is using, 14,542 people were murdered using firearms. Now, the majority of those, according to the FBI again, was using a handgun, which isn't even what Democrats are trying to push for control on. What they're trying to push for control on is assault weapons, and specifically calling them weapons of war. And again, notice, they're trying to play up the violence card. They're trying to play up the level of violence that's here in the United States, because what they're trying to do is make you scared. They want to make you scared and give up, and want you to give up your rights to being able to defend yourself, because it isn't just about being able to own a gun. The Second Amendment isn't just about, you should be able to own this. It's about your right as an American and just simply as a human being to be able, 1, to defend yourself from your fellow citizens, and 2, to be able to defend yourself from your government, because the people are the final check on the government. Now, again, look at what they're trying to do. They are pushing this narrative that America is a violent place. They are pushing this narrative that America is an awful place filled with mass shootings and daily acts of gun violence. There's weapons of war, people masquerading down our streets, causing violence. That's all it's about. And yet when we look at it, according to the CDC, of these deaths, 4.5 deaths per 100,000 people that have died are due to firearms. specifically, homicide using firearms. This is all about trying to scare people. This is all about trying to scare people after they've told you, hey, this is a public health crisis. We, the Democrats, we can solve this public health crisis because we're the guys about healthcare. And if you trust us, we'll give you common sense gun reform and try to take these things off the streets. It's not about trying to solve this issue. It's about the fact that they're trying to take away your rights, and it's about the fact that they are trying to take away your ability to protect yourself against the government. That's all this is about. It's about control. And they're trying to take away the core values and principles, trying to pull just these sneaky little tricks to try to get you, the American people, to vote for them, to give a vote for common sense gun reform. And again, they're trying to use data and facts. That's statistically wrong. Now, again, as we close out, as we come closer to the election, be on the lookout for these tricks. Politicians are famous for trying to pull some dirty side tricks all the time. Biden and the Democrats are trying to reframe this as a public health issue because it shifts the focus from your political rights to public health and safety. Because it's about the public. It's about the public health and safety. That's all it is. Give up your rights because it's a betterment for all of society. We cannot live in a society where you have to give up your rights if it means that we have to live in a world of peace. Now, there is a balance to be made. That's not to say that we should live in pure anarchy for the sake of having total freedom. That's not what I'm arguing for. What I'm arguing is that we have to be cautious of what the Democrats, and specifically Joe Biden, is trying to do to take away your rights as an American. They are priming you to view guns with fear and being okay with unconstitutional gun control policies while exaggerating how bad gun violence really is in America. They want to make us out to be these nations like Somalia or Venezuela or Guatemala, where there's high rates of crime and high rates of just murder, where these are crime and drug-riddled countries. We need to address the underlying issues that is affecting these. One of the biggest things is that poverty is often associated with crime. What do we need to do to fix that? But as we close out, remember to like and share. It is important that other people see the video and learn how the Democrats are trying to slowly creep towards outright banning your guns. Because remember, Joe Biden said he's going to put Beto to work. And remember what he said.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15.
About taking your guns. Remember, thank you for watching. Remember to like and share, and you have a good day.